And this speaks a little bit to some of the contradictions that are embedded within liberal security frameworks. And there's a ton of really interesting literature in international relations on liberal security. I'm sure you're well familiar with that. And you point out that the CVE program is it's public facing representational schema is one of sort of learning, listening, and helping, communities, but yet its symbolic and material effects are reinforcing historical and contemporary patterns of racial profiling and systemic racism. Could you talk a little bit about those contradictions in liberal, like how do you understand liberal security as a kind of governmental formation or form of governmentality in relation to this specific program that you talked about or analyzed?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, that kind of security formation is sort of swimming in the neoliberal multiculturalism, the politics of representation. Indigenous scholars have been, really questioning the idea of representation. So I think one of my struggles with this project was understanding how Muslim communities have been over-policed and over-criminalized, and that there is an effort to make the security state less harmful. And so there is a buying in of, one of the most common metaphors people told me throughout my fieldwork was, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so we want to at least be at the table, right? Like we at least want to have some kind of say.
Sorry, Nicole, I hate to interrupt you, but what did they mean by menu?
You'll be eaten. Like yeah. Like it's funny because everyone said it, and I aim to think it was a common phrase. So the idea is that they would rather, they know at the end of the day they're going to be criminalized, and is this a strategy to minimize that criminalization? So in some ways I could understand that. Of course, there are other folks young people who are saying, we're not going to participate in anything that criminalizes us. We can think of a world where we don't need to hedge in this kind of way. But I think people really bought into that neoliberal multiculturalism, the politics of representation, as a progressive reform. And Obama sold it as a progressive reform, although CVE is actually the brainchild of Bush, who said, in order to be successful in our war making, we need to be more liberal about it. We need to give Iraqi kids coloring books, and we need to play soccer with them so we can be better at, bombing and droning people. Like we can get intelligence through our community relations. And it's the same thing, like in community policing in the United States, it sort of draws on that same idea that we can get more intelligence, we can be better at policing if we have relationships with communities. So that's the state's perspective, is that these relationships help us do our dehumanizing project and securitization of communities better. Whereas communities are thinking, you're coming for us anyway. Is this a way to mitigate your coming for us? That's the liberal sort of narrative. The more radical narrative is, we don't need the state at all. Like this is not the game that we want to play. Like we want to set the conditions and terms ourselves. The question of terrorism is not relevant to our community. We think you're asking the wrong questions to begin with. Like the things that make us most insecure, participants would say, is economic insecurity, policing, war, brutality. Like these are the things that make us insecure. But sort of the liberal approach to security here was, if you participate in the making of national security, it'll be less racist, it'll be less gendered, it'll be less problematic. And you can see how people then get caught in that. Teachers are saying, well, it's better than me than a police officer. And the question is it really better if it's you as a teacher doing the policing than the police officer? And so I think those are, on the ground, things people really have to grapple with. I think it's easier when you're a little distant from the problem to make those claims about what's effective and what's not effective.